This video on fractions, we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting fractions. And for this video, we'll just focus on proper fractions. So let's start off with an example. So our example is 2 over 7 plus 3 over 7. Now this is a really easy example because in this example, you can see that the two fractions that I'm trying to add have a common denominator. So what this means is that they have the same denominator, and I need that to be able to add and subtract fractions. Once I have a common denominator, it's quite easy to proceed. All I need to do is add or subtract the numerators and then leave the denominator as it is. So in this case, I just say 2 plus 3 and the denominator stays as 7. And this makes sense if you think about it because I have 2 sevenths and I have 3 sevenths. That means I've got 5 sevenths. So really I'm just going to keep track of how many sevenths I have. It's very important though that I can only do my adding and subtracting if I have a common denominator. And if I don't have one at the start, I have to get one before I can begin to add or subtract. Okay, so here's a question for you, really straightforward. Work out what you get when you add 4 ninths and 2 ninths. Okay, well this really couldn't be any easier. Since I have a common denominator, I just add the 4 and the 2. So my answer is 6 ninths. Could I do anything with this answer to simplify it? Well, I can say 6 and 9 have a common factor, which is 3. 3 goes into 6 twice, and 3 goes into 9 3 times. So I can write my answer as 2/3. Notice that I wasn't able to do any cancelling back at this stage of the question, not only because the numbers in the numerator and denominator didn't have any common factors, but also because if I'm adding or subtracting fractions, I can't cancel at this stage. I must do my addition first of all, and then see if I can cancel. Here's a second question for you. 3/10 plus 2/10 plus 1/10. Take a moment to this, pause the video, and then play and see if you're right. Okay, so again, I've got a common denominator. It's tenths all the way, so no problem there. I can just add my numerators, and I'll get 6 over 10. And now I'll see if I can cancel. Well, 6 and 10 do have a common factor. So 2 into 6 goes 3 times, and 2 into 10 goes 5 times. So my answer is 3/5. So there's very little challenge in this really. It's just adding and subtracting numbers. No big deal. So let's go on to have a look now at what happens if we don't start off with the common denominator. How do I get over that hurdle? So here I have a question, 2/3 plus 1/4. Now I want to add these two fractions together, but remember I can only add fractions if I've got a common denominator, and I don't have that in this case. The denominators are different, so I have to get a common denominator first. So to find the common denominator, I'm looking for the lowest common multiple, the LCM of 3 and 4. What's the smallest thing that they'll both go into? And in this case, the answer is 12. So the LCM is what I want to use for the common denominator. I sometimes call this the lowest common denominator, or the LCD. So I know that I want it to be 12, so I'm going to write my two fractions down with 12 as their denominator. Now, because I'm changing the denominators of the fractions, that means I also have to change their numerators. Let's look at how. I'll use equivalent fractions. So I'm going to look at the 3 in the denominator of the first fraction as it was originally, and see what did I do to 3 to turn it into 12. Well, I multiply that 3 by 4. So I'll do the exact same thing to the numerator. I'll multiply it by 4 as well. So that means that 2/3 is now getting written as 8 over 12. I use a similar approach in the second fraction. So I had a quarter, but now I want it to be over 12. So I look at the denominator. Okay, what happened to the denominator? What did I multiply by to get 12? Well, here I multiplied by 3. So again, I'm multiplying the numerator by 3. And of course, 1 by 3 is going to give me 3. So now I've got 3 over 12. So I've got two fractions now that I want to add, 8 over 12 and 3 over 12. And that's absolutely fine because they've got a common denominator. So all I have to do is just add the numerators. And I get an answer of 11 over 12. So now here's a question for you. Can you work out what 2/5 plus 1/3 should give you? Pause the video here, give it a bash, and then play and see if you're correct. So first I want to find the lowest common denominator. And in this case, the lowest common denominator is 15, because that's the smallest number that 5 and 3 will both go into. So I'll write down my two fractions with denominators of 15, and I'll just leave a blank for the moment in the numerators. And now I need to sort out those numerators. So let's have a look. In my first fraction, it was 5, and now it's 15. How did that happen? Well, I multiplied 5 by 3 to get 15, so I'll multiply the numerator also by 3, giving me 6. And then I'll do the exact same thing on 1/3. I'll have a look at the denominator and see, well, what happened to that to make it into 15? Well, 3 by 5 is 15. So that means I must also multiply the numerator by 5. And that gives me 5 over 15. And now I've got two fractions with a common denominator, so I can add their numerators no problem. And the answer is 11 over 15. Here's another question for you. 3/4 plus 1/3 minus 1/2. Pause the video here, try this, and then play and see if you're correct. Okay, so I want to add and subtract some fractions. They have to have common denominators for me to be able to do this. What's the lowest common denominator? Well, the smallest thing that 4, 3, and 2 will all go into is 12. So I'll write down 3 fractions with 12 as their denominators, and now I'll figure out the numerators. Okay, so 3/4 first of all. I times by 3 on the bottom, so I'll times by 3 on the top. So I've got 9/12. For 1/3, I times by 4 to get 12 on the bottom, so I'll times by 4 in the numerator also, giving 4. And finally that half, well, I had to times 2 by 6 to get 12, so 1 by 6 will give me 6. And now that I've got 3 fractions with the same denominator, I can just do my adding and subtracting. Start from the left-hand side, 9 and 4 is 13, take away your 6 is 7. And my answer is 7/12. So just remember, you must have a common denominator to add and subtract fractions.